Welcome to the club.
Yeah, that's a good thing, Tali. That's why you're here.
And I say, okay, yes, we know that. I'm difficult. And what next?
So welcome to the Stream podcast, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg, an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Sarni, a water strategy consultant, doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel for updates on the latest interviews and the content. And today we're delighted to welcome Tali Harif, who is the Chief Operating Officer, COO for Puraffinity. Tali, welcome and great to see you.
It's a pleasure, guys. I'm Chief Commercial Officer, not Chief Operating Officer.
There we go. That was done on that was done as a test, just to check you're fully awake and with us from the start. So congratulations, you passed.
That's fine. I'm with it still.
Tali, that was the mic check. Tom knew all along.
Yeah. It's just an initial, right? CCO, COO. I mean, we're between friends. I mean,
to be honest, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good start. Good start though. Solid.
Okay, take one. Let's.
So, Tali, let's. We always. I mean, you've seen a few of the Stream podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Good stuff. So we always kind of start with the origin story, and for you, when we look back through your career, is really interesting from public to private. That we're going to come on to. We're going to touch upon innovation around PFAS a little bit later on. But tell us about your time in Israel, where you spent some kind of an early part of your career, and then how you kind of moved into the UK water sector, if you will. Yeah,
sure. Well, actually, I've probably spent more time in Israel than I have in the UK, to be fair. But if we kind of step slightly even back from that, I think it's growing up in Israel in general that has a very different type of environment that does provoke challenging, and it does provoke innovative thinking, and specifically in water in general, that's very much embedded in the industry over there. So even if you're just entering an early stage career in water in Israel, you're almost indoctrinated from the start with a kind of different way of doing things and looking at things and challenging from the start. Israelis are really good at not accepting no for an answer, right? So in that respect, I spent a lot of years in academia and decided to move out of academia. I think I'd probably liked a more dynamic type of environment, and landed in a startup in Israel. And we did, I would say, medium pressure advanced UV treatment. But you're in an environment there which is very dynamic, very forward thinking, very fast forward thinking, and you've got to get to grips with lots of things very, very early on. And again, failure is not an option.
Right.
A startup company, I'd say it was when I joined, there were about 40, 50 people, but still you're trying to break into markets. You're doing a lot of roles at once. You're doing technical, and you're doing sales roles in your technical capacity, and you've really got to get up to speed really quickly with how to address the market. And the learning curve is really steep. It's really good, but it is really steep. So that's where kind of my first foray into the startup world began in Israel. And I did various things in Israel after that, and I consulted various startups. I even consulted a venture capital looking at renewable energy, and moved around and worked for a company that does environmental services as well, trying to promote new types of business in those companies. And I think at some point I decided that it would be interesting to come back to the UK and see what working in the sector here would look like. hauled my family from Israel to the UK and started a role at WRC. WRC was the Water Research Centre of the UK government. It is a name in the water space. Very, very, very astute technical people on board, and provides innovation services predominantly to the UK utility sector. So my first foray into the utility sector in the UK was as an innovation consultant, and I headed up their treatment processes business unit. And at that point, it was interesting because I really had to get to grips very quickly with how the UK water sector thinks and promotes innovation. And how do you sell an innovation service to a very conservative sector? Mm-hmm. There were lots of challenges. There were lots of challenges there. And to be fair, we did diversify a lot of the offerings. And we did also open up accounts of blue chip companies. So, innovation services in water can be, don't necessarily have to cater only for the utility sector. They can cater for other sectors that have many problems also. And, Will, you're very aware of this, that need that help. So it was an interesting time. So that was, and I would say that a private company, but definitely did have still the remnants of that governmental mindset. That's how do you push those barriers within that type of organization and culture. So that was also quite challenging. Teams were great, teams were up for it, but it was more around helping educate what can be done and moving from what has been done for 30 odd years to something a bit different.
Right.
And from there, obviously I got to meet a lot of people across the sector, across the UK water sector, and then was offered a job at Severn Trent to manage their innovation portfolio, and landed it. So transitioning from quite a few years in the private sector, where your business mindset is you have to sell, you've got to promote what your offerings are and how do you create your value proposition and what types of customers are you going to focus on, and coming from quite structured business planning in terms of creating impact very fast, from that into a very slow-paced type of organization, which actually does want to do innovation, but in effect, because of how the company's structured, I would say it was finding it quite challenging to get things right. And it's a process, to be fair, and that process isn't going to happen quickly.
Do you think it was an inevitability going from a taste of private sector innovation from Israel, then coming to the UK consultant after the financial side, then UK consultancy, and then utility, Severn Trent, and then kind of where you are now? Do you feel like, having experienced either side of the fence, it was inevitable that you ended up back in the private sector startup?
I would say so, to be honest, yeah.
I think once you've had a taste of that life you mentioned, in terms of that frenetic energy, you have to be commercially driven, you have to sell, you have to be super. I'm not saying that the utilities are not ambitious, but what I'm saying is a different mindset in terms of the mantra that you operate.
And it's also, if you look at the utilities in the UK, they are private companies, but they are local monopolies. Right. So what is the drive to do innovation? Is it to create a larger customer base? No, not necessarily, because there's no competition, right? So it makes things, there are additional layers of difficulties that do, I would say, impact negatively the ability to change the mindset. But I would say it's a fair. That is a fair comment. Coming from the private sector, and you're in constant push mode, right? Constant push mode. Working really shoulder to shoulder with people to do stuff that is going to make real impact. and quite quickly also, into an organization that has a different type of way of doing things, and by default is going to be less innovative. They want it, but probably don't understand what it really entails. And that's not, that's not me, being criticizing. It's just is what it is. It's very hard to change that, into something else within a short period of time.
Tali, it increasingly is apparent to me that, when you're working with startups, the competition is really the status quo. It's not another company doing something similar to what you're doing. And it also strikes me that in the utility sector, that's even more profound. I mean, in the industrial sector, you could say, we've got to get people, the workforce to really understand what the value proposition is, and, risk being supported and taking, some level of risk. But in the, water, wastewater, utility sector and public sector very broadly, the installed base is just so hard to move. It just does not come easily by the very nature of, what's important to those stakeholder groups. So, status quo is a competition. Certain sectors like the public sector, utility sector, just don't have the same drivers that multinationals do in understanding innovative solutions and testing them out.
So let's perhaps flip it then. Yeah. Where did you see innovation within that utility that gave you optimism and hope? Because I think when you look globally at UK utilities in terms of innovation, there's the flagship projects of the innovation shop window with Anglian Water, and then you have United Utilities, the Innovation Lab, in terms of helping to scale, accelerate, work with companies and whittle them down. I've heard only positive things come out from those two initiatives and the guys that run them. And we've interviewed them for Aquatech. But so what gave you, from your time as the innovation manager at Severn Trent then, what did you think, what did you push through or see that you thought, this is innovative?
Oh, so many things. And just to maybe just add a bit more to what you said about, there are good initiatives, okay? There are good initiatives in quite a few companies in the UK. I think my main comment would be, how efficiently do they operate, and do they operate at pace? And at the end of the day, do they do enough? And if you look at the outputs, how much of those outputs are actually impacting the business, and within what time frame? So, looking almost at innovation KPIs, how they exist, but how are they measured?
Right.
That would be my major criticism. And the initiatives are there, and that's all good. That's all good, and it's great. But again, how well are they doing it?
Well, it's scalability, isn't it? It's going beyond just helping one organization or a startup scale to perhaps be used within that utility context, but then to go on and perhaps help them work with other UK utilities, so the country as a whole raises. That's the next stage. And Will, it relays nicely to, say, the 100 plus from AB InBev in terms of helping to innovate and scale solutions that benefit the entire industry, not just one particular company, right?
Right, and that was very deliberate by AB InBev in that, they had a broader view. And it's really interesting. I mean, their origin story around the 100 plus is that they really did not want it to be branded as AB InBev 100 plus accelerator. It was the 100 plus accelerator. And it really has a mission to scale solutions, not just for, their beverage sector, but also other sectors. And if you look at some of the companies that are coming into their cohort, and this ties into something you said earlier, Tali, that those technology solutions can be applied to a range of different companies. And, there are a few examples in particular related to Earth observation technology, data acquisition and analytics. So you can use them for, the public sector and utility sector, and for a global beer company.
Right.
It's interesting. Hey, Tali, you talked about innovation KPIs. Again, increasingly, I feel like, I'm sharing my journey here with both of you, but, the workforce is absolutely key in innovation. So, what's your take on workforce KPIs that give people the incentive, the comfort to try something new, as opposed to, well, if I try something new and I don't succeed, then, not getting a promotion, not getting a bonus, my career is dead, whatever it may be. I mean, what's your take on that piece of the puzzle?
So I'd probably tackle that from two angles, if I may. First is the workforce. What type of workforce are you looking for when doing innovation? So that's really the foundation, right? And then how do you create, what type of environment do you need to create for that workforce to excel? Okay, so if we just start the foundational workforce issue, and again, this is something I've seen a lot, and I have to say at Puraffinity, we have embedded a real strategy in how to create a forward-thinking workforce that can deliver. I would say you need diversity. You need diversity in that workforce. And to your point, Tom, if we're looking at the utility sector in the UK and looking at the workforce, I'm not saying everybody's like that, but how diverse are the teams that are running these innovation programs? How diverse are they? If you take a group of, I would call them lifers, not meaning any disrespect, everybody has their, obviously their career trajectory, and lifers in the same organization, and put them in a function that's supposed to promote innovation, that won't be the best way of doing it, to be fair, right? You have to avoid group thinking. You have to create diversity of thought. And when we talk about diversity, it's different experiences, different backgrounds, and different cultures.
So you're suggesting bring in new talent to run the innovation acceleration programs within utilities, say perhaps from the private sector, or former entrepreneurs, business owners, people that have raised capital, that have scaled innovations, that type of skill set. So bringing in fresh talent within utilities.
Yeah, I mean, you would need to combine. You need to have in the team people who understand the organization and been there, right, and can provide that type of input that's really, really important. But on the other hand, you do need that fresh view on things, and also the ability to challenge and to be really curious, and not be afraid to ask questions. And sometimes when people spend a lot of time in large corporates, you almost you become less challenging by default.
Right.
So yeah,
what was the phrase we used, Will, last time? Unreasonable people, right?
The power of unreasonable people.
Tend to be successful entrepreneurs, willing to say no and challenge authority, challenge ideas, challenge the status quo. Yeah,
difficult and challenging. And those terms have been used to describe me, and I find that very actually a complimentary.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, that's a good thing, Tali. That's why you're here.
And I say, okay, yes, we know that I'm difficult, and what next?
Tali,
let's move past this. Yeah,
right.
With startups, it strikes me that you really need the same blend also in terms of diversity. You need folks that know the water sector, but my preference is always to collaborate with people that are from outside the sector. So it's that tension of an outsider saying, you folks are out of your mind, that you haven't figured this out yet. This is, a path forward, coupled with okay, this is really cool. However, this is, how you need to talk about it. These are the customers you need to engage with, things like that. So it's sort of a smaller version of that diversity as a key attribute of innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you've got, so yeah, you've got that team building focus that's required, and how do you create, you know, a good team to drive forward innovation. But then you've got the organization itself, and so the exec committee and the board, for that matter, who have a responsibility to drive a culture that will enable innovation. So yes, it's okay to fail. And you know what? You should fail, because
Right.
you can't do innovation without failing.
You
But
can't learn without failure.
And move forward. So
isn't that the challenge? I mean, obviously the entrepreneur mindset is fail fast and keep failing until you can get to succeed, right? But then won't, from a utility point of view, that they cannot afford to fail, because if you fail and you have, say, a Flint on your hands, or I'm not going to name other utilities, then that is a legacy that's, just to play the devil's advocate here, that you cannot afford to fail when it comes to public health, right?
Well,
okay. So when I say I think when it comes to full-scale application of an innovation in a company like a utility that needs to provide potable water to, you know, clients, then you have to make sure that what you've done meets that standard, right? There are ways of staging innovation rollout, and innovation has its risks, but also you can create a risk management structure that is able to address those risks. So you don't go from 0 to 100 in one go. You would stage it, you would pilot it, you would understand its robustness, its difficulties, and you would do it in a way where you can get to a point of full rollout where you fully understand what you're dealing with. So that's how it's done. And you know, it's a whole philosophy that you know is quite clear to people that have done it and come from that background. Yeah,
I mean, Tali, to me, it's also you know, how other industry sectors de-risk innovation. You know, they don't, to your point, they don't go from, I've got a new jet engine, I think I'll try it out on, you know, a 300-person airliner. It is, you know, want to run it through, you know, bench tests, pilot tests, and, you know, and now we have the ability to do digital simulations, you know, the digital twin rage. So yeah, it's a process, but getting through those gates is really, in many ways, still a challenge.
Totally agree. And I think you're saying de-risking it, not exposing, say, the treatment to that innovation where you're at risk of failing in terms of a regulatory point of view, in terms of a public health point of view. Totally agree. But then it's kind of, how do you get past the pilot phase? I remember being at an event in Miami, and this line came up from the audience. It's like, there's more pilots in the water sector than a commercial airline. How do you get past the pilot phase? Because there seems to be so many different pilots, perhaps. And you're saying, well, that's just part of the journey then to get to commercial rollout.
Well,
it's almost like that.
That's part of the structure of the process. And if there are too many pilots and you're keeping in pilot stage, then obviously something's wrong. Okay. And that you know, if you're clear on the process, if you're clear on what you want to achieve, and you're clear on your value prop, on the outputs, you've got to embed that in a very clear scope of work that will include piloting. But then you either take the pilot forward or you kill it. You don't just do it and continue doing it. Right. You know, so it's about the planning phases need to be really, really robust to be able to squeeze squeeze the best out of the technology as possible, and to get the best data as possible. And then you make a decision: can you go forward or not? But I think I do agree that there is a lot of piloting still happening, which is important, but I would question what's the duration of those pilots, and are there any cases where actually those pilots could have been taken forward to full-scale implementation? Right. And there is a fear factor in the industry, because, you know, failure has ramifications, but then how do you then stage rollout? How do you manage that? And there are ways of managing that as well.
Tali, do you see a difference between the utility sector and the industrial sector in terms of that innovation roadmap and, you know, the speed of going through these gates?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I really have had the pleasure to work with large blue chip companies, the likes of Coke, Pepsi, Nestle Waters, Diageo, all of those. And I've to be honest, I've had a really good time with them. You know, we've always kind of been aligned on what needs to be done. And again, the motivations are probably slightly different. The timelines are also different. They need a solution. They're not going at this from a, you know, almost a conceptual standpoint. They have a problem and need to address it, and they need to address it quickly. And if they have, for example, an issue with in a production facility and need to sort it, that needs to be done. It's not, you know, but again, I think also, to be fair on the utilities, the industrial sector has less volumes of water to deal with in many cases. So the rollout process can be managed more easily in some respects, depending on what we're talking about, what type of innovation, technology application. But yeah, definite differences there. And I think so the decision making in the industrial sectors is far quicker. You know, there's a clear return on investment that they're looking for. If you meet those and you meet the performance criteria, then they'll probably take it forward. You know, there's no messing around in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree with you. I also find, but you know, we've had drinks together. You know that I don't always agree with you. I'm polite, but I also find the private sector has a maybe in some sense a broader value proposition. You know, if you look at their stakeholders, they connect to consumers, customers. They have brand value that can be compelling from an innovation perspective. And so, you know, as a result, the moving parts are different. In my view, it's more robust and can accelerate innovation, piloting, and adoption. It's just interesting to compare the two. And I wonder if some of those lessons from the private sector can be, you know, dragged into the utility sector and the public sector very broadly.
Yeah, I think, you know, brand is everything in the industrial sector.
Right.
And I think it's the emphasis. I mean, it's important for utilities to maintain their good name, obviously. But I think, you know, that real focus on maintaining a brand is less apparent in the utility sector. And things will happen and people will still be buying their product, right? Because they're not going to stop using water, right? So there is more, I would say, of a lax attitude to how do you really maintain and promote your brand and ensure that you really do everything you can to align your operations with maintaining that brand in the utility sector versus the industrial sector.
Right.
Well, when there's, I guess you don't have the choice where you're based geographically for your supplier. There's not the incentive to perhaps market yourself. I mean, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of how bottled water companies market themselves compared to water utilities, but clearly there's a huge contrast on how they do that. But maybe that's for episode 2. But Tali, we've got a few minutes left and we haven't really touched upon where you think there'll be innovation in terms of PFAS and how big an environmental challenge this will be. Just in terms of a top level, I think, like we said, we'll need to get you back on for season 2 next year to carry on the conversation. But it'd be nice just to kind of get some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, well, PFAS, you know, I would say is probably the most severe water quality crisis in modern times. There's no way you can look at it differently. It's terrible, and understanding the ramifications, the broad ramifications of it is just is mind-boggling to be fair. Obviously, in the US, I don't know much you're aware of what's going on in the regulatory space in the US, but these are unprecedented times, and we've got, 10, 12 states now driving PFAS regulations, and they're not even waiting for the EPA. That's never happened before.
Yeah. What's the EPA?
Sorry, the US EPA.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right.
Sorry about that. Yes.
That was a little bit of a cynical
joke from Will.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're quite subtle, but I've kind of learned
that was a good one, Will. You put me off guard there. I'm usually quite sharp.
It was just a bad
but
joke.
you say what is so I could in the context of PFAS, Will, your comment was totally on the ball.
Right. The states are taking the charge themselves to set the regulatory limits on PFAS.
Individual states, and it makes it really even more challenging, because then you've got loads of different regulations in different areas.
Right.
And so the complexity with PFAS is you've got, first of all, in terms of the family, we're talking about 4,700 different types of compounds. And obviously, you're not going to generate regulations for 4,700, but they differ. They differ in their chemical properties. And if you look at treatment options, that is going to heavily impact your treatment ability. So how do you tackle very elusive micropollutants, bring them down to really stringent treatment levels, and also keep enough flexibility in your design process to be able to then move fast when new regulations come out to deal with other PFAS compounds.
Right.
What you've developed beforehand may not be able to deal with, to the best effect, simply because you're just dealing with a different type of chemistry. Similar, very persistent, but there can be small differences that will make things harder.
I did an interview with Mike Marcus from Orange County Water District, and they were doing a trial with different activated carbons in terms of PFAS removal. It was interesting to see the developments there. But I agree, it's one of the biggest environmental challenges facing certainly my generation and our generation to come. So, but Tali, let's kind of bring it to a close there, if you don't mind. We definitely want to bring you back, because I think we want to talk more with you about innovation. Really enjoyed the discussion about where this can go, and to perhaps hear more about early next year about solutions and innovation within the PFAS space. So we want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. And Will, any final closing comments from you?
Yes, I look forward to really having a longer conversation about the people side of innovation and your thinking and experience on, how do we replicate what works in engagement. And, your comment about diversity was I think really spot on. So I'd love to see us unpack that next time we visit.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about it, because I believe that those are the foundations for doing great innovation. Companies, they thrive on their teams, and getting it right from a team perspective, from a human resources perspective, is really, really key. So it's something I'm really passionate about. Would love to continue the conversation on.
I heard a great quote on that, Toby. Close. We did a webinar with Piers Clark from ISLE, and he said the first few people you hire, the first employee 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you count on one hand, that will be a reflection of how your organization looks when you have 150 people. Like that, those first few employees, that will, if you're hiring 5 guys in their 60s, for the experience, then that's eventually how it will grow. But if you have a diverse, young, agile team from the start, that's eventually what will make up your organization. So,
yeah,
great way to close, Tom.
Jerry's closing comment, right?
Yeah, I love it.
Well, Tali, thanks again for your time. We'll definitely have you back.
It's been a pleasure.
Great talking with you. And
Anytime.
For people watching and listening, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel for updates on content and future interviews. Tali, Will, thanks. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Be well. Be safe.
Bye for now. Cheers.
Bye.